What I want to do now is create a transition between this scene and the next scene of my jogger. Let's import the footage. In my footage for editing demo folder, I have two remaining bits of footage: film burns 4 and young woman jogging on the beach. I'm going to select both of those and select open. I'm going to select this shot and drag that into my timeline. I want it to begin roughly here at the 6-second point. So I'm going to position that bit of footage in a layer over top of my original layer. If I scrub, you can see that at about the 6-second point, I get a hard cut from there to there. But I don't want to have such a sharp transition like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a glitch edit that will sit over top of this hard transition. Now, glitch edits like this are often used, perhaps overused, but they are effective. That's why we're going to put in a film burn transition. I'm going to select my film burn 4 footage, and I'm going to drag that into my timeline and drop that right at the transition point of those two bits of video. Now you can see that I'm going to have to do a little bit of adjustment here in my size. It is a lower resolution, but considering the way we're using it, that shouldn't matter. Now if I scrub my timeline, you can see that this bit of footage starts off as a black screen and then flares out to a completely white screen right about there that I want to have as my transition point. If I expand my timeline, that is in fact right at that point. I'm going to change my blend mode for this layer by selecting that layer and revealing the modes section of my layers panel, and I'm going to change this to screen. Now you can see if I scrub my timeline that I have a very quick glitch edit between those two scenes. Okay, let's complete this exercise by doing our last bit of editing on this second clip. In the demo, you'll remember we had our person running on the beach and then stopping in mid-stride right about here as we see the runner in full extension. However, I have a bit of a problem. This film footage is in slow motion, and it is in fact too slow. I would like this runner to be in this position in full stride sooner in my timeline. That means I'm going to have to speed up my video. Here is how you do it. In my layers panel down here, you'll notice that I have a labels layer that shows all the labels for the things underneath, like source name and mode and track mat. But that layer is actually clickable. You'll notice if I click on it, I can highlight it. And I'm going to hold down the control button as I do. And when I do that, you can see I get this pop-up menu. I'm going to come here to where it says columns. And what this allows me to do is it allows me to put different properties into this label section. One of them here, where it says stretch, allows me to stretch, literally, this film footage. I can stretch it out to make it go slower, or I can squish it down to make it go faster. In fact, I want this bit of film footage to go faster. I want it to go twice as fast as it does. So that means I'm going to change my value from 100% down to 50%. I'm going to say okay. Now, when I come back here to my film footage, you can see that my jogger is now in full stride at the 8-second point. But now I want to do something else. I want the footage and the jogger to stop. That's going to require that I do something to the time of this layer. I'm going to do something called time remapping. Let me show you how I'm going to do that. Make sure I have that layer selected. I'm going to come to the layer drop-down menu, and I'm going to come here to where it says time, and I'm going to choose this first option, enable time remapping. Let me zoom out on my timeline just a little bit so you can see what's actually happened. Time remapping allows us to play with the playback of any film clip. The effect has placed a keyframe at the beginning and end of this layer indicator. I can move these around here. I can speed up the film clip quite a bit by bringing these closer together, or I can slow it down by bringing these keyframes further apart. In fact, I don't want to move these at all. What I would like to do, though, is place a hold keyframe right at this frame so that I can freeze the playback at this point here. To do that, I'm first of all going to position a new keyframe right at this point in the timeline by coming over to my keyframe navigator and putting a keyframe there. I'm now going to right-click or control-click that keyframe to reveal this pop-up menu. One of the options is to toggle the hold keyframe. This keyframe has now been turned into a hold keyframe. If I scrub my timeline, you can see that as my playback gets to that keyframe, it will hold there until I put another keyframe to tell it to do otherwise. It's at this point that I'm going to create a shape layer that will be the outline of my jogger. I'm going to come to the layer drop down menu and select New, Shape Layer. And I'm going to zoom in by hitting Command +sign. I'm going to position my jogger in the center of my screen. Now, being comfortable with the pen tool in After Effects takes a little bit of time, especially if you're more familiar with the pen tool as it exists in Illustrator. But we'll attempt to do it here. You could, if you wanted to, create this graphic outline in Illustrator if you're more comfortable that way, and then import it into After Effects. However, it is quicker if we can do it here in After Effects. I'm going to select the pen tool, and I'm going to change my properties so that the fill is set to none and the stroke is set to white. I believe 7 points will be exactly what I'm looking for. I'm going to start at the top of the head. I click once and then click and drag just as I would in Illustrator. Let me zoom in even closer so I can see this better. Now this is where After Effects is different than Illustrator. In Illustrator, I could convert this from a smooth anchor point, as it is now, to a corner anchor point by just clicking on it and converting it. But in After Effects, I do it a little bit differently. I'm going to hold down my Option button to change my pen tool into the Convert Anchor Point tool, and I'm actually going to click on this Bezier handle and drag that up like so. I can now control that pen tool a little bit better. I'm just going to go around the outline, my jogger, Again, I'm going to have to hold down my Option button, click on that Bezier handle to adjust how that line comes out of that anchor point. Okay. And I'm just going to finish this by clicking once on that first anchor point, and there we go. Now this shape layer I don't want to have visible until this jogger has already reached that position. I'm going to have it draw itself on using the Trim Paths effect. To apply that, I'm going to select my shape layer. I'm going to hit Return to rename it. And I'm going to click the downward arrow to reveal the Contents section. And what I really want to see is this Add button next to Contents over here. This arrow is a button that I can click that reveals some of the different properties and effects that I can add. The one that I want is this one here, Trim Paths. I'm going to open this up so I can see this a little bit better. Trim Paths allow us to draw a line onto our screen. The way this works is I'm going to position my current time indicator right where I want this line to begin drawing itself on. I'm then going to take my start and end values and make sure that they are both set to 0. I'm going to create a keyframe for both those properties. I'm now going to drag my current time indicator to the point where I want that line drawn on completely. I'm going to have that draw on fairly quickly, and I'm going to take my end value and drag it to the right. Now you can see here my line is drawing on from the top of the head and going around the back of the figure like this. If I want the line to draw on in the opposite way, so that it draws over the front of the figure and then around the back, then I'm going to have to make a small change here. I'm going to come up here to where it says Contents, and underneath that there is a property here called Shape 1. I'm going to twirl that down, and right here where this path property has these two indicators, and that is basically the direction of the line. Currently you can see the line is pointing backwards. I'm going to click on this button here though, and now when I take my end value and drag it to the right, you can see that it's now drawing on the front of the figure, which is exactly what I'm looking for. I'm going to drag that all the way up to 100%. I now have my line drawing on in the way that I want. I'm going to space out my keyframes a little bit more. I'm also going to add a little bit of easing by selecting those two end value keyframes, and I'm going to give it a little bit of ease in, ease out by dragging this middle slider to roughly that point there. I now have that effect. I'm going to zoom out to see what that looks like. I'm going to position my current time indicator over top of that transition and then press my space bar, and there you go. The last thing we need to do is put in the final title screen that we see at the end as the text and the outline both scale up as the text animates on. To do that, let's create our text layer. That way we can combine the two elements so that we can scale the two together. I'm going to close this layer, and I'm going to come to the layer drop-down menu and select New Text Layer. And the text basically says, now that we have this text placed here, I'm going to animate it on by using a preset text animator. I'm going to come to the Effects and Presets section. I'm going to reveal the Animation Presets folder, and here is my text animators. And I want these words to animate in, so I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to keep things nice and simple. I'm just going to scroll down here to Fade Up Words. Before I double click that, though, to apply it, I'm going to position my current time indicator to the point where I want those words to begin fading on. So roughly at that point, I'm going to double click Fade Up Words. If I scrub the timeline, you can see how each word. Okay, at this point, I'm going to take these two layers, the text layer and the jogger outline, and I'm going to turn those into their own composition. I'm going to come to the Layers drop-down menu and select Pre-Compose or Command-Shift-C on my keyboard. I'm going to call this End Screen Graphics because that's what they are. And I'm going to say, okay, I now have those two layers grouped together. Now I want these to scale up, but I have to be aware of my anchor point. Let me show you what I mean. I'm going to choose this layer and press S to reveal the scale property for this composition. And if I was to scale this up just by dragging this, you can see that my text scales up off the screen. I just need to reposition my anchor point. And remember how we do that. I'm going to come over to my toolbox and choose my anchor point tool. And I'm just going to click on that anchor point and drag it to the right at the end of my text. So it will expand from this point outwards. I'm going to create a scale keyframe here, and I'm going to position my current time indicator a couple of frames further down my timeline, and I'm going to scale up so that my text and my jogger outline have now filled the screen. I'm also going to give them a little bit of easing by selecting both of them, and again I'm going to choose my ease in, ease out slider and drag that roughly to the middle. See what that looks like. That feels fairly comfortable. I like that. The final thing is I want to have a new color block fade in over the video in the background. And again, I think the easiest way to do that is just to create a new solid layer that will cover the entire screen. And I'm just going to choose a mid-value neutralized blue and say, okay, I'm going to position that below my end screen graphics composition. And I want that to fade in just as the graphic starts scaling up. So I'm going to position my current time indicator right over top of that scale keyframe for end screen graphics. And I'm going to take my medium gray blue and I'm going to reveal its transparency property by pressing T. I'm going to click the stopwatch to create a keyframe for that. I'm going to position that keyframe about there, and then I'm going to take the value down to 0 at this point so I can have it fade on as that is scaling up. Again, press my spacebar to see that, and there we are. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim my animation down to 18 seconds roughly so I can trim off all that stuff at the end. Composition settings, I'm going to say trim comp to work area. And there is our completed editing in After Effects composition tutorial. The last thing I wanted to show you was that back in Premiere Pro, our initial clip has now been replaced by our After Effects composition. And these are connected through Dynamic Link, Adobe's behind-the-scenes software that allows these two programs to communicate with each other.